It was a rainy evening when I first realized that losing my tech job wasn't my lowest point. No, the real turning point came when I found myself moving into my grandfather's old cabin, tucked away on the edge of Pine Lake, Colorado. It wasn't just the loneliness that hit me, it was the feeling of being stuck. The cabin, once a refuge for childhood memories, now felt like a hollow shell, a reminder of the life I had lost. I had been a rising star in the tech world before it all came crashing down. I developed an app that detected data breaches, a tool that could have saved countless companies millions. But when my app exposed a major corporation's security flaws, they blacklisted me from the entire industry. The company's lawyers ensured that I wouldn't get another job in tech, effectively locking me out of the career I had built for myself. To make matters worse, my divorce was finalized around the same time, and my savings were quickly draining away. The cabin, inherited from my late grandfather, was my only refuge. At least there, I wouldn't have to pay rent. It wasn't the cabin I remembered from my childhood. The place had seen better days, paint peeling off the walls, creaky floors, and a general sense of neglect that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. But it was mine now, and that gave me a sense of pride, however small. I figured I'd take some time to get my bearings, maybe find another job in tech, and rebuild my life. But the moment I arrived, things took a bizarre turn. There was a sign at the entrance of the bridge that led to my cabin. A yellow caution sign, not one I'd ever seen before, with bold letters that read, "No access." As I stared at it, my heart sank. The only way into the cabin was across that bridge. The thought of being stuck there, unable to even leave for groceries, was unbearable. But it got worse. As I sat there, trying to make sense of the situation, a car pulled up beside me. A woman stepped out, dressed in an oversized navy blazer that swallowed her tiny frame. Thick glasses magnified her eyes, giving her an almost otherworldly look. She walked toward me, her heels clicking sharply on the gravel. "Excuse me," she said, her tone cold and practiced, as if she had delivered this speech countless times before. "I'm Margot Keller, president of the Pine Lake Community Homeowners Association. You can't park here. This bridge is community property, and unauthorized vehicles are prohibited." Her words were clipped, as if I were the 1,000th person to ask her about the bridge that day. I tried to explain myself, tell her who I was, that my grandfather had owned the cabin for decades, but she barely looked at the papers I handed her. Instead, she launched into a tirade about rules, regulations, and procedures. The HOA was responsible for the entire area, she said, and I had no right to cross the bridge unless I followed the community guidelines. I was taken aback, to say the least. I had never heard of an HOA in the area, and my grandfather had never once mentioned any sort of regulations. But I didn't argue. I simply took the citation she handed me for improper flag display and went back to my cabin, confused and frustrated. That night, I pored over the HOA's handbook, which Margot had graciously given me. The rules were endless, every aspect of daily life was regulated. The height of the mailbox. The paint color of the house. The exact angle at which your car could be parked in the driveway. It was a labyrinth of rules that seemed designed not just to maintain order, but to control every aspect of life in the community. As I read through the handbook, something didn't sit right with me. The original documents from the development's early days were simple. But the newer regulations, added in recent years, were much stricter and more invasive. What bothered me most, though, was the feeling that something was off about this HOA. My grandfather had lived here for decades, and I had spent many summers visiting him. Yet, I had never heard a single mention of an HOA, let alone any bridge restrictions. Something didn't add up. The following day, as I set off for the county offices to check the property records, I noticed the same set of headlights passing by my cabin window twice. Each time, the car was gone by the time I looked outside. But I shrugged it off, until I started receiving citations for even the smallest infractions. The mailbox was too low. The driveway wasn't perfectly aligned. My porch light was too bright. Every day brought a new citation, each with a fine, and each accompanied by a visit from Margot, who had taken it upon herself to ensure I adhered to every rule. She wasn't just a stickler for rules, she had become a living embodiment of bureaucracy. Her tone was always condescending, as if I were a child being punished for not following instructions. She'd taught civics for years, she said, and she believed in the importance of maintaining order through rules. But what she didn't seem to understand was that these weren't just rules, they were weapons she wielded to control everyone around her. I had already spent a small fortune on fines. $50 here, $100 there. It was becoming clear that no matter how hard I tried to follow the rules, it would never be enough for Margot. And then, the bridge. That was when I decided to dig deeper. What if this bridge, the one Margot insisted was community property, actually wasn't? What if there was more to this situation than I realized? The next morning, I ventured to the county offices. The air was crisp, and the sky had cleared after the storm, but the feeling of something lurking just beneath the surface never left me. I had no idea what I would find in the records, but I had to know. Was Margot right about the bridge? Was it truly community property, or was I being swept up in a power play designed to break me down? When I arrived at the county clerk's office, I asked for the property records for my grandfather's cabin. Curtis Myers, the county clerk, was an older man who had been with the county for decades. He knew my grandfather well. I had always remembered him as a kind and warm individual, but today, there was a sense of urgency in my voice that I hadn't felt before. "Can you tell me about the bridge my grandfather built across the lake?" I asked, leaning over the counter. "That old thing?" Curtis laughed. "Your granddad was proud of that bridge. Built it himself, used his own money, and paid taxes for it every year. It's been there longer than most of the people living around Pine Lake, son. It's private property, and the county's always treated it as such." I stared at him, processing what he was saying. I had grown up hearing stories of my grandfather's independence, of how he had done everything on his own, but hearing Curtis speak about the bridge like that was an entirely different thing. It hit me, the bridge had always been a part of the land, part of the independence my grandfather had built for himself. But now, Margot and the HOA were trying to claim it, trying to dictate who could cross it and who couldn't. "Do you have any documents that show it's private property?" I asked, my voice steady now. Curtis pulled up the records on his computer. He clicked through a few windows before turning the screen toward me. "Here it is," he said, pointing to the screen. "Your grandfather filed for a permit back in 1960 to build the bridge. It was approved, and he's been paying maintenance taxes for it ever since. The bridge is listed under Morrison Bridge Tax ID number 4471. It's always been his." The words felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I was holding the key, the one thing that could undo everything Margot had tried to do. I thanked Curtis, shaking his hand firmly, and made my way back to the cabin. As I walked back across the bridge, it felt different. This was my bridge, my property. The thought that the HOA had been blocking my access to it was absurd. But it wasn't just the bridge. This was about something larger, my rights, my home, my legacy. I wouldn't let it slip away because of Margot's power trip. When I returned to the cabin, I sat down at the kitchen table and went through the documents Curtis had printed for me. There was no doubt now. This bridge wasn't part of the community, it was part of my grandfather's property, and it was time to take action. But I needed help. I called Lena Brooks, the paralegal I had met at the HOA meeting. I knew she could be my ally. When she answered, I could hear the curiosity in her voice. "Dave, what's going on?" I filled her in on what I had learned. "This is huge," Lena said, her voice picking up pace. "If you own the bridge, then the HOA has been trespassing on your property for years. They have no right to block it. And if they've been denying access, that's criminal mischief. You've got the documentation. This could be the breakthrough you need. I explained that I needed her help to understand the legal implications of everything, and she agreed to meet me later that evening. I could tell she was just as invested in this now as I was, but this wasn't just about legalities anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, for the principles my grandfather had instilled in me. As Lena and I sat in the small coffee shop, the weight of the document spread out before us felt less like a burden and more like a weapon I could wield against Margot's authoritarian reign. Lena pointed out something I hadn't even noticed. One of the original letters from the county, dated May 3, 1960, confirmed that the bridge had been built with official county approval. The bridge wasn't just private property, it was protected by law. "This is airtight," Lena said, a look of admiration on her face. "Your grandfather was a genius. He anticipated everything." She leaned in closer. "The HOA has no idea what's coming." I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose flood back into me. The community hadn't been told about the bridge's history, and Margot had kept everyone in the dark. The residents had been crossing private property all these years without ever asking for permission. I could stop them, make them pay for what they had done, or at the very least, make them acknowledge my ownership. I knew it was time for the HOA to face the truth. The next day, I called Margot. I wasn't going to let her continue acting like she controlled everything. It was time to level the playing field. "Margot," I said, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk about the bridge." Her response was immediate, her tone still filled with that air of superiority. "Mr. Morrison, if this is another complaint about the bridge's safety, I can assure you the board's decision is final. We've done everything by the book." I let her finish, then delivered the line I had been rehearsing all morning: "Margot, I own that bridge. I have the deed, the tax records, and 60 years of county documentation. We need to talk." There was a long silence. I could almost hear her flipping through papers, trying to find a way to counter my claim. When she finally spoke, her voice was shakier than before. "That's impossible, Mr. Morrison," she said, clearly trying to maintain her composure. "The bridge serves community access, and it's been maintained by resident fees for years." "Not anymore, Margot," I replied, "because it's my property. I'll be at the emergency board meeting tonight to present the evidence." The evening of the emergency board meeting arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread. I hiked into the community center, my heavy boots crunching through the gravel, each step feeling like a small victory against the power Margot had tried to exert over me. My heart raced as I thought about the documents tucked securely under my arm. This was my moment to stand up for what was mine, to remind the community that I wasn't just some outsider they could push around. I had the law on my side. As I entered the room, the usual faces of the board members greeted me. Margot, of course, was at the front, sitting at the head of the table with her ever-present clipboard. But this time, there was something different about her, something almost vulnerable. The room was packed with residents, murmurs filling the air, and a few of them nodded in my direction as I made my way to the front. Frank Weber, the retiree who had initially offered his advice and support, greeted me with a nervous smile. He sat near the back, trying to look like he wasn't taking sides, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He knew what was coming. Margot called the meeting to order, her voice steady, though there was a hint of nervousness hiding beneath her practiced tone. "Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to discuss an important issue raised by Mr. Morrison. It has come to our attention that he has made some claims regarding the ownership of the bridge that serves the Pine Lake community. I want to assure you all that we've been handling this issue with care and that we are acting in the best interests of the community." I stood up, the folder in my hand feeling heavier than it should, but I didn't falter. I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "Thank you, Margot," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak. But I think it's time for a little clarity about this so-called community property. I opened the folder and handed copies of the original 1960 county permit to the board members and residents. This bridge, as it turns out, has never been community property. It was built by my grandfather with his own money, with proper county approval, and has been maintained privately by him, and now, by me, since its construction. The room fell silent as people flipped through the documents, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. Margot's face was pale. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to process the information, but it was too late. I had already delivered the truth, and there was no denying it now. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice faltering, "these documents," she hesitated, looking down at the papers as if searching for a flaw in the evidence. "These documents don't change the fact that the bridge has been used by the community for decades. People rely on it for their daily lives. And I'm not asking anyone to stop using it," I replied, cutting her off. "But I'm asking for recognition of the fact that this bridge is mine, and mine alone. You have no right to block access or control who crosses it." The room was tense. The other residents seemed caught in a tug-of-war between Margot's authority and the facts I had presented. Frank was looking down, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. The attorney Margot had brought in remained silent, but I noticed his eyes flicking between the documents and Margot, as if waiting for her to make the next move. Margot took a deep breath, visibly struggling to regain her composure. "Mr. Morrison," she began again, her voice less certain than before, "I understand that you're upset. But there are procedures for these types of matters. We've been operating under the assumption that this bridge is community property for over 20 years. Changing that now?" I didn't let her finish. "You've been operating under false assumptions," I interrupted. "I've paid the taxes for this bridge. I own it. And I have every right to decide how it's used." There was a murmur in the crowd. Some residents exchanged uncertain glances. Others were still processing what I was saying. But for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't just a target. I wasn't a helpless resident being pushed around by an HOA president who thought she could do whatever she wanted. I was taking control, and the community was starting to see it. Margot's attorney cleared his throat, standing up and addressing the room. "While Mr. Morrison's documents appear authentic, there are still questions about the easement rights. The fact that the community has used this bridge for so long may create a legal precedent. The board may want to consider looking into this further." Curtis Myers, the county clerk who had helped me with the records, stood up from the back of the room. "I can help with that," he said, his voice booming across the room. "I've been processing the taxes for that bridge for decades. The county has no record of any easement agreements for the bridge. If there was an easement, it would be in the county's records." The room was still, and I could see the shock and realization spreading through the crowd. The HOA's claims were unraveling right in front of them, and there was nothing Margot could do to stop it. The attorney exchanged a few words with Margot, who now seemed less confident, less certain in her authority. "I think," he said slowly, "that we should adjourn for now and look into the matter further. We'll need to review these documents and discuss the next steps with the board." Margot didn't protest. She just nodded, looking defeated. She was no longer the towering figure of authority she had once been. The board meeting adjourned, but the damage had been done. The residents had seen the truth, and Margot's reign was crumbling. That night, I sat in my grandfather's cabin, the weight of what had happened finally sinking in. The battle wasn't over, but I had taken the first steps toward winning it. The bridge was mine, and no one could take it from me. Margot might have tried to control the community with her rules and fines, but she couldn't control the truth. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just about a bridge. This was about taking a stand for what was right, for my grandfather's legacy, and for the principle that no one, not even an HOA president, should have the power to trample on what belonged to me. The days following the board meeting were filled with an unsettling quiet. The usual hum of the community, its friendly waves, neighborly chats, and peaceful routines, had all but evaporated. The whispers and sidelong glances I received as I passed people by were a far cry from the warm welcomes I used to get. Some residents clearly sympathized with me, but many simply avoided eye contact, unsure of where to stand in this strange new reality. Margot's grip on the community was loosening, but the tension was palpable. I didn't expect the fight to be over. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, especially now that the whole town had witnessed the unraveling of Margot's authority. I knew that Margot would regroup and try to find another way to regain control. But for the first time, I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let that slip away. The following week, I received a letter from Margot's lawyer. It was carefully worded, as expected, full of legal jargon and threats of further action. But the core of the letter was clear: they were willing to negotiate. It was a thinly veiled attempt to save face, and I could see right through it. They wanted to discuss a potential compromise, one that would allow the HOA to maintain some level of control while acknowledging my ownership of the bridge. The tone of the letter made it clear they were nervous. They were no longer talking about their community property, and instead, they were acknowledging what I had known all along: the bridge was mine. They were backing down, but not without trying to preserve their dignity. I called Lena immediately after reading the letter. She had become my most trusted ally throughout this ordeal, and I knew she would be able to guide me through the next phase. "Lena, we've got a letter from Margot's lawyer," I said, my voice steady but tinged with excitement. "They're trying to make a deal." "Did they admit the bridge is yours?" Lena asked, her voice sharp and focused. "Not directly," I replied. "But they're trying to find a way to make it work without losing face. They're offering a compromise. They want to find a middle ground." Lena paused for a moment, clearly weighing her words. "This is good, Dave. It means they're scared. But we have to be careful. Margot won't give up her authority easily. She's not just fighting for the bridge, she's fighting for control of the entire community. If we give her an inch, she'll take a mile." She was right. This was a critical moment. I couldn't afford to give in now, not when I was so close to winning. But I also knew that a direct confrontation would escalate things even further. I needed to play it smart. We agreed that I would meet with Margot and her lawyer, but only on the condition that I had legal representation with me. I wasn't going to sit down at the table alone again. If they wanted a deal, they would have to play by my rules. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. I spent the days leading up to it preparing, gathering every piece of evidence I had. The bridge wasn't just a matter of property rights anymore, it was a symbol of my struggle, my resistance against Margot's overreach. It represented my fight for independence, not just from her but from the entire system she had built. I also spent a lot of time thinking about my grandfather. He had been a man of principle, someone who didn't bow to authority, someone who believed that the things you built, whether a bridge or a life, were yours to control. His legacy was wrapped up in that bridge. And I wasn't going to let Margot or the HOA take it from me. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. I wanted to make sure everything was in order before Margot and her lawyer arrived. As I stood at the foot of the bridge, I thought about all the times I had crossed it as a child, the times my grandfather had stood there, surveying his land with pride. That bridge wasn't just a structure, it was a testament to everything he had built. And now, it was my responsibility to protect it. Lena showed up right on time. She was dressed sharply, her presence calming, but I could see the fire in her eyes. She was ready for this. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as we walked toward the community center together. "More than ever," I replied. "I'm not backing down. Not now." Margot and her lawyer arrived soon after, both of them stiff and formal. Margot didn't look as confident as she had at the board meeting. She was trying to keep her composure, but the cracks were starting to show. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile, shook my hand, his grip firm but not warm. "We're here to discuss a fair resolution," Margot said, her voice clipped. "I hope we can reach an agreement that satisfies everyone." I nodded but didn't speak. I wasn't there to negotiate for the sake of appeasing her. I was there to get what was rightfully mine. Lena took a seat beside me, and we all settled into the uncomfortable silence that followed. After a few moments, Margot's lawyer opened a folder, sliding several documents across the table. "We're prepared to offer compensation for the inconvenience caused by the bridge situation," he said. "In exchange for an easement agreement allowing continued community access to the bridge, we're willing to pay you a lump sum." I took a moment to look over the documents, reading each one carefully. They were offering a sum of $25,000. It was a significant amount of money, but something about the way they presented it felt off. It felt like a bribe to silence me, to make me go away and leave them with the control they had been so desperate to maintain. I could feel my pulse quicken as I processed the offer. It wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not interested in just money. This isn't about a handout. It's about respect. You've spent months harassing me, imposing fines, and blocking my access to my own property. And you've done it with complete disregard for the truth. So, I'm going to make my terms clear." Margot's eyes flicked nervously toward her lawyer, who shifted in his seat. "I want a public apology," I continued, my gaze fixed on Margot. "I want the community to know that you overstepped your bounds, that you tried to take what wasn't yours. I want all the fines you've imposed on me over the past 6 months to be dropped, and the money I've already paid refunded. And I want an annual Freedom Week, during which no citations will be issued for minor violations." I paused, letting my words sink in. The silence in the room was heavy, and I could feel the tension building as Margot considered my terms. "And lastly," I said, "I want the community to pay me $25,000 for the easement rights. It's not just about the money, it's about ensuring that no one ever tries to control my property again." Margot's face, once a picture of authority, was now a mask of frustration and disbelief. She had clearly expected me to cave, to accept a small payout and move on, leaving the bridge, and the power, where it had always been, in her hands. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This was more than just about property, it was about standing up for my grandfather's legacy, and for my own right to control what was mine. There was a long silence after I laid out my terms. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the wall clock, marking time as Margot and her lawyer processed what I had just said. Lena remained silent beside me, her gaze steady, watching the two of them like a hawk. She had seen this type of negotiation before. She knew how to play it, and so did I. Margot shifted uncomfortably in her chair, adjusting her glasses for the umpteenth time. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to figure out how she could salvage this situation, how she could maintain some shred of control. But for the first time in months, she was no longer the one holding all the cards. I was. After what felt like an eternity, Margot finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her words measured, "I understand that you're upset. But these demands," she trailed off, clearly searching for a way to placate me. "I don't think they're reasonable. This community needs that bridge. The residents depend on it. Everyone has depended on it for years," I shot back, keeping my tone even. "And I've never had a problem with that. But it's my bridge, and it's my right to decide who crosses it. You've been using it without permission for decades, and that stops now." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "This is about power, Margot. You've abused your position, and now you want to continue doing so with a slap on the wrist. I won't let that happen. I'm not just asking for compensation, I'm asking for accountability." Margot's face flushed, a deep red creeping up her neck. She didn't like being challenged, especially in front of her own community. The weight of the situation seemed to settle on her like a shroud. Her lawyer cleared his throat, but Margot waved him off. She was the president of the HOA. She was supposed to be in control. But now, I could see that control slipping away. After a few moments of tense silence, Margot spoke again, this time more slowly, as if weighing each word. "You're asking for a lot, Dave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I suppose we can work something out." I didn't let her finish. "I want those fines refunded, and I want a public apology. No more games, Margot. This isn't about compromising, it's about acknowledging that you were wrong, that you overstepped your bounds. And I want the community to see it. You've had your say for months. Now it's my turn." There was another long pause. The sound of the clock seemed louder now, the seconds dragging on as Margot considered her options. I knew she had already lost the community's trust. After the board meeting, after everything that had come to light, she was no longer the undisputed leader she once was. She had been exposed for what she was, a bully hiding behind bylaws and regulations. I will issue a public apology," she finally said, the words clearly a struggle for her. "But I can't just drop all the fines. The community can't afford it. It would set a dangerous precedent." I stood my ground. "You can afford it. And you'll do it, because it's the right thing to do. If not, then I'll enforce my rights, and the bridge will stay closed until we come to an agreement. I'll make sure the community knows exactly what you've done." "That's not a threat, Margot. It's a promise." She flinched at the finality in my voice. For a moment, I thought she might argue further, but instead, she slumped back in her chair, defeated. She had no choice now. I had one. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and negotiations, but slowly, I started to see the pieces fall into place. The HOA had agreed to refund all of the fines they had imposed on me, and they had agreed to the $25,000 payment for the easement rights to the bridge. But it wasn't just the money, it was the sense of justice that came with it. Margot had been forced to recognize my ownership, forced to back down, and forced to publicly apologize for her actions. That was a victory that couldn't be measured in dollars. But the most meaningful part of this process came when Margot finally made her apology to the community. At the next board meeting, she stood in front of the residents, her glasses perched on her nose, and addressed them in a voice that lacked the usual authority she exuded. There was no lecture this time, no condescending tone. She was simply a woman acknowledging her mistakes. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice quiet. "I'd like to address something important. Over the past few months, I've overstepped my boundaries as president of this association. I've failed to respect Mr. Morrison's rights as a property owner, and I've made decisions that were not in the best interest of this community. For that, I am truly sorry." There was a long silence as the residents absorbed her words. Some exchanged glances, some nodded, but all of them were listening. They had heard her authoritarian speeches before, but this was different. For the first time, Margot was admitting that she had been wrong. She wasn't above the law. She wasn't above the community. Her apology was a turning point. It wasn't just a personal victory for me, it was a victory for the entire neighborhood. It showed that standing up to injustice, no matter how entrenched it may seem, could lead to change. Margot had lost her grip on the community, and with it, the power she had held over so many for so long. A week later, I installed a new sign on the bridge, the one that would replace Margot's "No Access" sign. It wasn't a sign of defiance, but a sign of respect. The new sign simply read, "Private Bridge. Please nod. Thank you for your respect." I wanted to make it clear that this wasn't just about ownership, it was about community, about neighbors acknowledging one another, and about recognizing that there were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. To my surprise, most residents respected the sign. They understood what it meant and followed the simple request to nod in acknowledgement when crossing. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. The bridge wasn't just a piece of property anymore, it was a symbol of how communities could function when respect was at the forefront. As for Margot, she made several attempts to reclaim some sense of control over the HOA, but her attempts were met with resistance. Slowly but surely, the residents started questioning her decisions, pushing back against her rules, and ultimately creating a more collaborative and understanding community. And as for me? I continued living in my grandfather's cabin, not as an outsider, not as someone who had been pushed around, but as someone who had reclaimed his right to live there. My career was slowly rebuilding as well, and I found new purpose in helping other communities navigate their own property rights issues. My grandfather's wisdom, his foresight, had given me more than a home, it had given me the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, steady transformation. Pine Lake, once under the tight grip of Margot and the HOA, started to change. The atmosphere in the neighborhood was lighter, more open. People began to speak up, voice their opinions, and, most importantly, question the rules they had been living under for so long. It was as if the entire community had been holding its breath, afraid to rock the boat, and now they could finally exhale. I continued to live in my grandfather's cabin, the place that had become more than just a home. It was a reminder of everything he had stood for: independence, respect, and the importance of standing up for what was right. The bridge, once a point of contention and frustration, became a symbol of my resolve. It wasn't just about property rights or the battle with Margot. It was about preserving something much deeper, the legacy of my grandfather, and the principle that no one, no matter how powerful, should ever be allowed to trample on that which belongs to you. As for Margot, she continued to serve as the HOA president, but her power had been broken. The community no longer followed her blindly. People began to question her decisions, and the once feared board meetings turned into more of a forum for discussion than for dictatorial rule. Margot tried to regain control, but she had lost the support of the very people she had tried so hard to dominate. It was clear to everyone, including her, that her reign was over. It was a slow burn, but one that was undeniable. I spent more time at the cabin, doing what I could to restore it to its former glory. It wasn't easy, living in a place that had been abandoned for years had its challenges. But there was something deeply satisfying about fixing what had been broken, about restoring the legacy my grandfather had left me. The cabin was no longer a symbol of my failures or my loss, it had become a place where I could rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. And in the midst of it all, I found new purpose. My consulting business started to take off. I used my experience with the HOA to help other communities navigate property disputes, teaching them how to protect their rights and fight back against unreasonable authority. It wasn't just about making money, it was about sharing what I had learned, helping others avoid the same mistakes I had made, and giving them the tools to protect their homes and their livelihoods. I had become something of a local legend, the guy who took on the HOA and won. I even had neighbors come to me for advice, asking how they could challenge the rules, how they could stand up for themselves. Strangely, the whole experience had changed me, made me stronger. I had been knocked down, but I had come back fighting, and now I was helping others do the same. One afternoon, I sat on my grandfather's porch, looking out at the lake that had been the backdrop to so many childhood memories. The water was still, reflecting the clouds above like a mirror. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting a soft glow over the landscape. I had come to understand the beauty of this place, not just in its natural surroundings, but in the memories it held, in the lessons it taught. It wasn't just about owning a bridge or fighting for property rights. It was about standing up for yourself, for your values, and for the people who matter to you. It was about having the courage to fight back, even when it felt like the whole world was against you. And in the end, it was about knowing that, sometimes, the greatest victories come not from winning a battle, but from restoring balance, from finding peace, and from knowing that you did the right thing, even when it was hard. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.